How will the autumn budget impact the UK's electric vehicle industry? What can be expected from the global new car market in 2026? And which announcements could shake up the battery production sector in Europe and beyond? This is the Automotive Update, presented by Autovista24. I'm Tom Hooker, Autovista24 journalist, here with the latest edition of the Automotive Update. I'm here to take you through the last 7 days of automotive news. Firstly, the UK's autumn budget was presented this week in the House of Commons by Chancellor of the Exchequer Rachel Reeves. Within the budget, one new tax will have a big impact on current electric vehicle drivers in the UK as well as potential buyers. Now, I can't think of anyone who is more knowledgeable about this, nor can I think of anyone who has spent more time diving into the data than our special content editor Phil Curry.
Hi Tom, and it's certainly an interesting topic.
It definitely is. I think most of our listeners already know quite a bit about electric vehicles, but certainly for those outside of the UK or not in the industry, this can all seem quite complicated at first glance. So could you give us a really basic overview of how the current system works and then what's set to change?
Well, the electric vehicle market comprises two technologies, battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids. Now, there is a real push in the UK at present to increase the uptake of battery electric models ahead of a ban on new petrol and diesel car sales in 2030 and a zero-emission only policy for new cars in 2035. There are targets to reach for each car maker every year until 2030 as to the percentage of registrations that are zero emission. That's not been helped by the addition of Vehicle Excise Duty, or VED, for battery electric vehicles this year, as well as making them eligible for the expensive car supplement, and I'll come on to that in a moment. But the UK budget announcement also included the introduction of a pay-per-mile scheme for both battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids, which is due to start in 2028, and as the government states, will make the entire motoring tax system much fairer.
Okay, so what does this actually mean in terms of cost then?
The rate for BEVs is currently set at 3p a mile for 2028, while the cost for a PHEV is 1.5p a mile. According to a government consultation document on how drivers can declare mileage, there is a suggestion that these prices will rise in line with inflation for the following years. Now, this scheme is called the Electric Vehicle Excise Duty, or EVED. EV drivers will need to submit their estimated annual mileage when reviewing their regular VED and pay for that mileage in advance. This can be done either in one go or by spreading the cost monthly. Based on the UK government figures suggesting the annual distance a car covers is roughly 7,000 miles a year, this means battery electric vehicle owners would pay £210 a year in extra tax. This is on top of the VED rate that currently sits at £195 from the second year of registration onwards. To put this into context, the current fuel duty rate in the UK is 53p. With an average mile per gallon rate of 36 miles for petrol vehicles, this works out to 7p a mile. This means the same 7,000 miles currently costs a petrol driver £490 in tax. So if you drive a battery electric vehicle, you are still saving compared to an internal combustion engine model, but it is an additional tax nonetheless.
So that sounds to me like still a considerable hit for battery electric vehicle drivers. Do we know if there's any car makers that are trying to help out with this?
Well, Chinese brands Omoda and JQ have actually announced an EV tax rebate. They are offering the equivalent of 20,000 miles of tax, working out to £600, off the price of the Omoda 5 EV and the JQ 5 EV. This can be claimed now as long as the car is purchased with an approved 48-month finance agreement. No other car maker has yet offered a similar deal at time of recording, but it will be interesting to see if any others come about.
I want to actually touch, if I can, Phil, on one of the points that you raised during your article, and that was a particular problem that you noticed for plug-in hybrids.
So the plug-in hybrid rate is half of the BEV rate at 1.5p. But this is not really a generous offer, far from it. The government's consultation document, and there will be a link in the show notes, states that the reduced mileage tax will be applicable to the entire distance travelled by the vehicle, no matter what power option it is using. The government states that separating fuel and electric only driving is impractical, and by calculating the cost using the reduced rate will be easier for motorists. This is set to make plug-in hybrids the most expensive option to run. These cars will still be subject to fuel duty, so if a driver does not charge the battery and runs only on fuel, they'll be effectively paying up to 8.5p a mile, made up of the average petrol cost per mile and the EVED rate as well. So, over 7,000 miles, a plug-in hybrid driver could pay up to £595 a year in tax.
Okay, this sounds like a lot of bad news for EV drivers, but was there any positives that came out of the budget?
Well, an additional £1.3 billion of funding will be allocated to the electric car grant. That's the incentive scheme for battery electric vehicles that was launched earlier this year. This will also be extended to run until the 2029-2030 financial year, which the government hopes will increase the uptake of battery electric vehicles. In addition, a further £100 million was announced for charging infrastructure, with the government keen to encourage more homeowners to install charging points, even if they do not have off-street parking. There was also an announcement that a report is to be prepared on the cost of public charging, which is expected to be ready in late 2026. The expensive car supplement, an additional tax for vehicles with a value of over £40,000, is to be raised for battery electric vehicles to £50,000, so more models do not qualify for extra annual payments. And for petrol and diesel drivers, while the 5p cut on fuel duty remained, it will be phased out by March 2027. Fuel duty itself has been frozen for a number of years now, but is expected to rise in line with inflation in September 2026.
Thanks very much for the rundown, Phil. Now, if you'd like to learn all the ins and outs of the latest changes to EV tax in the UK, then check out Phil's in-depth article on autovista24.com. There'll be a link in the show notes. This week saw another great webinar from Autovista Group, and its moderator is here with us today. You may recognise his voice. It's Autovista24's editor, Tom Gegas.
Hey Tom, how you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks. Excited to dive into this one. So maybe you can kick us off with what the webinar was about and who was on the panel.
Well, the title was Global New Car Market Outlook 2026. The panel consisted of Dr. Christoph Engelskirchen, Autovista Group's chief economist, as well as its product director, Dr. Anna Langer, and sales director, Dan Parnell.
Okay, so what were the major talking points?
Yeah, so we broke the webinar down into three sections. The first one dealt with the economic and electrification headwinds that the automotive industry is currently facing. Then the second part was looking at technological and developmental and affordability trends for BEVs, battery electric vehicles. And then finally, we had a look into the Chinese brands entering Europe and the response of incumbent brands. And then, of course, all of that was followed up by a Q&A session.
Let's dive into that first section a little bit deeper. Will electrification continue to see headwinds?
Ooh, short answer yes, long answer with a but. Christoph outlined that economic conditions will continue to provide headwinds globally for all powertrains, with GDP down in many areas, but relatively flat in terms of inflation. Also, a slow post-COVID-19 pandemic recovery is hurting the industry as well as protectionist policies. Despite these factors, battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids are likely to see a growing market share in many regions, including Europe and China. It's only North America that seems to be a little flatter on the uptake.
And with growing market shares, I'm sure the discussion around battery electric vehicles reaching price parity with internal combustion engines is only going to grow. So are battery electric vehicles also set to become more affordable in the future?
Well, Anna did explain that more affordable BEVs are being launched after a little bit of a hiatus between 2021 and 2023, when there was a bit more of a focus on premium models. And alongside this, there are more BEVs with better ranges being launched than 3 years ago. In Germany, there's an increasing number of battery electric vehicles costing under €30,000 now being launched that are capable of ranges around the 300-kilometre mark.
I know some of these models with these impressive stats are coming from brands that are quite new to Europe. So what advice did the panellists give to these newcomers?
Well, Dan emphasised the need for these brands to stay focused on working on their software, which they're great at, and working towards even better quality while maintaining their price and packaging structure, which is good. There's, of course, the need to meet different demands in different markets across Europe, because Europe is not just one market. And then, of course, there's a need to balance supply and demand. And then, of course, there was so much more content in this webinar that included advice for incumbent European brands, the development of vehicle life cycles, and which battery chemistries have the brightest future. And I'm going to recommend that everyone head over to Autovista24 where you can read our coverage and watch the webinar recording. And if you like webinars, which I assume you must do, our next webinar is called 2026 Residual Value Outlook, Regional Shifts and Trends. And that's going to take place on the 21st of January next year.
Amazing, thanks Tom. Now, if you'd like to get insights like this sent directly to your inbox, then sign up for our email. There's a sign up form at the bottom of our homepage on autovista24.com. Check out our YouTube channel too. There you'll find our What Is Explainer videos, launch report insights, and webinar recordings. And of course, subscribe to the Autovista24 podcast wherever you listen to us. There has been a lot of battery production announcements this week. Firstly, CATL revealed it will train up to 4,000 workers to operate its €4.1 billion battery plant in Spain, according to Reuters. The site will begin production in late 2026, supplying batteries to Stellantis. It marks China's biggest investment in Spain and is also backed by €300 million in European Union funds. The project will be Spain's biggest battery production facility when it is completed. LG Chem and Sinopec announced a partnership to develop key materials for sodium-ion batteries, Electrive reported. Meanwhile, Foxconn will expand its own battery production, according to Electrive. And Panasonic Energy will supply batteries to Zoox, Amazon's self-driving unit, Reuters wrote. A big thanks goes to the whole Autovista24 team. In order of appearance, special content editor Phil Curry and editor Tom Gegas, and our wonderful web editor James Roberts co-produced this episode. The music was Better Find a Solution Fast by Richard Ames. Thanks very much for listening to the Autovista 24 podcast.